It also removes the pressure, because often we put this pressure on us because we have to perform for said audience.
Yeah.
And we gotta have everything set up, and we gotta have our eyes and
and then because when we have that pressure, then we start censoring ourselves, not in the sense of like censorship, but in the idea that we have this expectation of, oh, I'm supposed to do this now. I'm supposed to do this now. This is expected of me. And when we do that, then we get self-conscious about it. And then a lot of the good stuff, that stuff that's in us spontaneously, that stuff that's in us that isn't ordered, that just kind of is, it's like popcorn. It's just here, there, but it's great stuff, but it doesn't fit into this neat little package. And so it's like making cookies, right? So we have the cookie cutter. That's a great analogy.
Yep.
And then you make the cookie, but then there's all that other stuff, the extra dough, right?
Yeah. And I think the beauty of life, and this is a challenge, I know it is for me often, because once you get into a performance mindset, now what you're doing is you're performing for said crowd.
Or an expectation, even that you set up for yourself.
That you've set it up. And so now, in some ways, you've actually set a barrier. Or
it's
a boundary.
limiting. It's a limit.
It's exactly it.
It is
it's
a
limit.
And sometimes it's useful.
Yeah.
I'm not dogging on the whole thing, but other times it robs you of the spontaneity and the stuff that comes out of the moment, right? So what we've said for years, you and I, we have these conversations, like just we call each other up or we get together and we get into these amazing conversations. And then after, an hour or so, we're talking, we get so excited about what we're talking about, spurring each other on. Oh yeah, and that, and inspire. And then we always say, oh man, I wish we could have recorded that, and so this is kind of what we're doing, right?
That's exactly
rather than sort of have this performance mindset where we have to do this A, B, C, D, E because there's an audience listening. Let's just begin to just have our conversations and let other people listen in. And
invite them into a conversation. And I think that's the most beautiful thing that you can have. Often, when you're hanging out and you're maybe in an environment that you've never been to, church is actually a great example of that. And part of, when you enter a new environment is you're an outsider. And you kind of don't know what to do. And so you're just kind of sitting there and you become very self-conscious. But when that moment you get that invitation, when someone invites you into a conversation, that's one of my favorite things to do actually in life is often I see the guy or the gal that is on the outside looking in. And often I try to figure a way to invite them into the conversation because all of us want to be included in a conversation. Even what's happening right now in our world today is very much about that there's a group of people that have felt that they haven't been part of the conversation.
Right.
And so the idea of inviting somebody into something is beautiful. I love it. And I think even from a spiritual perspective, I think that's what happens to us is that we this idea of Jesus coming to earth, that's an invitation.
Right. But let me add another dimension to that because and being invited to something, but also being invited as you are.
Oh, I love it.
As opposed to being invited like, because as you say it, I'm getting like these almost traumatic flashbacks of church, you come to church and for me, a lot of that experience was you become a different person when you step through those doors,
Yeah.
The classic idea, and I mean, I've experienced this, you're driving to church with your family, your wife and kids, and you're just having one of those days and you're having a big argument in the car and everybody's just having a day. But as soon as you get to the car, you just, praise the Lord, and you almost feel like you have to, perform. Again, because there's this container that's already been set up and there's a set of expectations, and that's not all wrong all the time.
No.
You wouldn't walk in there naked or whatever. Like there's something that's necessary about sort of a social contract to a certain extent, but it does often lead to the other side where you leave most of yourself outside because you are invited in, but only on the condition that you blend in.
Yeah.
That you don't come in with all of your baggage. We don't want that part of you. We just want this part of you. And that message is never stated emphatically, but we hear that loud and clear.
Of course. I think we all do.
And so inviting, I think that I know that's what you mean.
Yes, that's exactly
right?
what I mean.
Inviting the totality of person, come with your difference to me, right? Come with your otherness. Don't come in order just to
Fit.
be like me. Come and bring me something else to enrich and enhance this conversation. That kind of invitation.
That's exactly
very powerful.
And I think that even nowadays the conversation about diversity and inclusion and all those terms, obviously those words mean different things to different people. But the way I like to think of it is the fact that everything, even nature, is incredibly diverse. The beauty of life is found in diversity. When you're in an environment where it's a monoculture where everybody thinks the same, behaves the same, looks the same, it's kind of boring actually after a while. And so part of, I love the idea of adding color to our lives. And often, people will say things like, Joe, I don't see color. I'm like, what? That's just a dumb statement. You should see color. Because we're all different. The world, there's blue sky. There's
Well, see it like I hear what you're saying because I know what you mean.
Yeah.
See it as an enhancement, an enrichment. Like
correct.
Right. Because the problem, even in that context, right, is that's what the heart of racism really is looking down on another person. And,
correct.
And ascribing to them a position lower than you for whatever reason,
correct.
Whether it's based on the color of skin or any number of criteria where one group of people or one individual decides that another person is less than them, and that whatever their distinction is not something beautiful and something that adds to the richness, but something of a threat, something that subtracts, something to be rejected. That's the fundamental issue there, right?
That's correct. That's it.
So the idea of, again, embracing people and seeing our differences, not only accepting and tolerating, but celebrating and loving and enjoying the otherness of the other as adding to us, not subtracting from us.
That's it. It's beautiful. And funny enough, and I've learned this in my own life, it's that when you move towards the things that you're afraid of, it could be in any area of life often, that's where the richness of life is found and discovered. Growing up, one of the beautiful things I think for me anyways is that I've had the opportunity to live in different countries. And so I remember leaving, Eritrea as an 8-year-old and coming to Italy. It was a terrifying process for a young kid. But as I look back to that experience now, I see the richness of it and how much it's added to my life.
Yeah.
And how it's enlarged my perspective. And it's allowed me to, I think the way I look at life would not have been the same if I had not had that experience. And so sometimes you got to go into places that you're uncomfortable. And I think that's what we're not good at these days. We're not good at having uncomfortable conversations.
Right.
We're not good at hanging out with people who may not necessarily agree with us. So what we've become, and I think we've become very fragile because of that. And I think social media has a lot to do with it. It's contributed in creating these silos where these little echo chambers, you only listen to people who think like you. And I do blame social media because, as someone who does a lot of marketing, I understand the process in the sense of putting people into these, specific silos so that you can advertise to them.
Yeah. And, I was just saying this to somebody the other night. I was listening to another podcast talking about Netflix and the rise of Netflix and how they have a very, very powerful algorithm, right? And you see other movies that you based on your viewing habits, and not just what you watch, but how long you watch, how many times you repeat a scene. I mean, it's amazing the detail that they collect, and then they feed you back. And I'm often frustrated by that because I do like sort of having other, if you like this and you'll like this, that's great. I mean, and I discover stuff, but I'm also a person who I want to discover stuff different than what I like. So if I like horror movies, but I want to find some great comedies or whatever, things, or especially documentaries, because I watch a lot of documentaries.
Yeah, of course.
I want documentaries not just on the topics that I already know and already like, but to introduce me to new worlds, new ideas, new things that I didn't even knew I liked until I was exposed to it.
Yeah.
Well, under that kind of algorithm, I don't get that opportunity because I'm just being fed stuff that already is consistent with what I've already shown an interest in. That's great, but I want to develop new interests. So how do I ever do that when I'm not being introduced to the opportunity to try something new that I would not have watched out of my own present experience?
But
you know
what
I
you're
mean?
saying is really powerful, because these algorithms, what they're doing is they're actually perpetuating a greater divide. Think about that.
Oh yeah.
Because when something continues to reaffirm your own biases, and so, you know, if you're a conservative, you watch only conservative programming. If you're a Christian, you only watch Christian programs. And if you're a quote unquote liberal, you do this, and so forth, so on. And so I've noticed this even for me. This is fascinating, because suddenly Netflix has been suggesting tons and tons of black programming, because they're like, they figured out I'm a black guy just based on stuff that I've watched. And so I've noticed that, and I thought, wow, it's great that they're making these suggestions, but they're making a whole lot of assumptions about me based on my consumption.
That's right.
Because that's the beauty of it all, is that most people, when introduced, so food is a classic concept of it. There are people that maybe have never tried Indian food because it's too spicy. So they've grown up their entire life hating Indian food. They're like, oh, I don't eat Indian food. But then one day they end up traveling to India and they get immersed into the culture, and they realize,
like,
wow,
what have I been missing
all my life?
Well, that's what I mean. Like, exposure to new things should be something we welcome, not something we fear.
That's it.
Right?
That's it. And it's not threatening. It actually, we should invite them. And this is where I think for me, even the purpose of this is to invite people into conversations that may necessarily not enter into.
Yeah. And you didn't even know you were interested in that.
Correct.
But the joy of that discovery.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean,
like, for example, in our relationship, because you and I have been friends for eternity, it seems like, some of the things that you love, I've come to enjoy.
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, you're a big Broadway guy. I mean, you know, the Sangallis, you're all about the Broadway. And for the longest time, I used to kind of make fun of it. Let's be honest.
Really?
Yeah,
I did not know
you
that.
didn't know this,
Oh.
okay? It was just something, you know. I grew up as a jock, but I never were allowed to, because if you're a jock, you don't do things like that.
Yes. I get it.
And so our relationship has allowed me to kind of enter into that world and begin to go, you know what? I actually like it.
And you don't have to become like
No.
a rabid fan of it.
No.
You can just sample it and enjoy it. There's stuff that we love that we just have no end of tolerance for. We'll just take it in large doses and whatever. And there's other stuff that, once in a while, I can appreciate it, but it's not my main go-to, right?
No.
So it can be at that level, right?
Well, it's exactly it. Like, I mean, I'm a huge sports guy. You're not.
No.
And, we have conversation, but the conversations that we have, which we just had actually just prior to this thing going live, was a little bit about coaches. And we were talking about this idea of, coaching is the only profession where you don't necessarily have to be an expert at the thing you're coaching somebody in.
Well, what I more specifically,
Sorry.
Be able to do it.
Yeah, be able to do it.
Like if I'm coaching you as a basketball player, then I maybe can't even, I miss 10 out of 10 baskets.
You're not great
but
basketball.
I can coach you to hit 10 out of, you know what I mean? That's what I more meant in that context.
Correct.
So I don't have to be able to have the skill that the person I'm coaching has.
Correct.
Same with directors. Like a movie director probably typically can't act.
No.
But he knows exactly how to get the best performance out of an actor.
Yeah.
Right. And it's about that. It's about what we were talking about the ability of a coach to see what's inside of a person and to draw it out, to bring it from the inside out. Right.
And maybe we should let them into this conversation. It's really, the purpose of this is all about centered around this idea of bringing things from the inside out. And I think for me, on a personal level, it's been a journey of living life and learning to live life actually from the inside out. I think for most of my life, I've struggled to live from my essence, my true, identity. And for most, and I think we all have these little, I call them our Achilles heels, I guess. It's things that we struggle with. And I think for me, that I've struggled with since, a young kid, I think, is wanting to fit in.
Yeah.
And we all have our thing. And for me, I just wanted to be part of the in crowd. I always wanted to be, to fit in. So fitting in was kind of the whole holy grail, my obsession in life. And so for the longest time, I left parts and pieces of me behind just so that I can fit in.
Well, that's we were describing that a few minutes ago, that a lot of even yours and mine church experiences around that concept, right? That in order to fit in this culture, you do need to leave parts of you behind.
Correct.
Or at the very minimum, skillfully hide them,
Yeah.
because you know that they're not welcome, right?
Yeah.
And so you have this very confusing experience because you do fit in.
Correct.
And so you get the benefit of that sense of community. I'm part of this. You're part, there's that.
There's
you
beautiful
get that
stuff
from it.
Totally.
But at the same time, you give up, a deeper part of you. And then over time, which is what happened to you, which I think, in my opinion, there's only two places this goes over time.
Yeah.
And sometimes that time is even decades. You either come to a crisis where you figure, wait a minute, like, yes, I fit in. Yes, I've been in this culture and I've been part of it, and willfully so. And there's so much of it that I've enjoyed and has been benefit to me. But there's a lot of me that's dying or dead as a result, and I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And so you get out, or you double down, and you suck it up. And particularly a lot of the types of Christian cultures that you and I have been in also encourage that as that's a spiritual act of quote unquote dying to self. That is, that you're supposed to do that you're supposed to, right? But that's really backwards, right? Because the self that we're supposed to die to is not the true self, who we really are. It's who we've become as a result of pain or trying to fit in, or all these other versions of ourselves that we've put on through expectation, all sorts of reasons. And the reason we want to die to that self, because so that it can get out of the way, so that the real self, the true self, the deepest self, the inner self,
that's it,
which is wonderful and amazing, and when it has its ability to fully come out and be, that's so that self you're not supposed to die to.
No.
You know what I mean?
That's it.
So there's been this confusion between those two types of identities, and a lot of it in the Christian world has been trying to suppress an identity that really should not be suppressed, really needs to actually come out and flower and be fully let out. Actually.
Yes. And for me, through the journey, one of the things I've learned is, we all have two versions of ourselves, and the lower and higher version.
I've heard you talk about that a lot.
And that's been something that I've unpacked over the years. And I think that lower version is that version that wants to fit in, that is essentially living at a kind of a low-level reality. It's almost like what I call existing. We can all exist. And I think we see this not only in church context, but you see this in 9-to-5 world. Most people are just waking up every morning and just existing, but not really living.
Reminds me of Braveheart. That's the line. That's the line from Braveheart.
Yes.
Every man dies, but not every man truly lives. Something like that.
That's correct. But that is true. And so this is part of, I think, the journey of life. And this is why, we're calling this thing Inside Out, because I always believed, that term inside out, like, it's living life from the inside out, not from the outside in.
Right.
And I think often, because we're masking and we're trying to fit in and all that stuff, we focus so much on the external things. And those external things you can live off that. And most people have actually created pretty big, successful companies and ministries and so forth, so on, from that place. But it's not sustainable. That ultimately it crumbles.
And we all, regardless of what people believe in terms of God or not, we definitely there's something about human beings, wherever it comes from, that transcends just sort of the physicality. I was thinking that really recently when my mom passed away just a few weeks ago, right? And I was able to go in and just visit her one last time, but it was her corpse. She was already dead, but she was lying in her bed at the nursing home and very peaceful. And I thought again, none of us know exactly what happens after life, and it ranges anywhere from absolutely nothing to great, glorious eternity and everything in between, right? But something, her body, it was there, but she's gone.
Yeah.
Right. And we can, that's, I love science. I believe in it and all that stuff, but that's something, there's something about us. There's this intangible, if, people of faith would call it spirit or, soul or whatever, that you can't deny that. You can't deny it. We can't fully explain it.
No.
We can't fully understand it, but we can't deny that there's something in the human being, something that's why when somebody dies, the body's still there, but the person's gone. Yeah. So there is something that was there and isn't there anymore. And it's not the body, because the body, there it is.
Yeah, it's still
you know
there.
What I mean?
Yeah.
So whatever that is, and however you want to parse that out, and whatever you want to believe about that, and even if you believe it's temporary, if you're a total, like a naturalist, and you think, well, whatever that is expires when you expire, and it's whatever. But even while we're alive, that thing that inside of us that longs for meaning and
purpose,
and purpose and acceptance and love and like that, you see that over and over. Like you're talking about, how often do we hear this story, right? All the external stuff, which is great stuff, but doesn't seem to satisfy that thing.
No, it doesn't.
The one that really struck me once was Michael Jackson. I remember watching this documentary about him and how, this guy at the time, this is like, you got to remember the time, he was like a god. Like everywhere he went in the world, especially in the 80s, he was adored. By millions of people. He was literally the king of pop at that time. And I remember seeing this whole documentary, and yet the one thing he could never seem to get that dogged him all his life was his father's approval.
Yeah.
And so he had the approval of the adoration of millions and literally millions and millions of people, like adoring, and talk about fitting in or being, being validated by other people. That's not too many people experience that. No. And yet, whatever that thing in him, that hole, that whatever, was not touched by that.
Not crazy.
Right?
Yeah. And that's the lie of fame, though. And often, I know Jim Carrey and all these guys talk about this, and they often say, if only people can get, rich and have lots of money.
I'm always one of those people that says, can I try it for myself? I believe you and all, but like, I just want to, that's one of those lessons that I want to try.
But it is though, but that is one of those lessons I think often has to be experienced in order to be learned.
But you hear that over and over.
But you often hear it. But this is the human psyche, to how we function. Even though there's clear evidence to tell us that this is not something to be pursued. Like, so we've got clear evidence. There's people who've done it, from
time and time again. They
again.
come back to tell the story. Hey, I went to the top of the mountain. It's not all that it's crapped up to be.
That's not the answer.
When I got there, I didn't find what I was really looking for. That a very, very consistent theme, right?
You go online right now, and the one obsession of almost every person out there, to some extent, is this holy grail, the American dream, or whatever that dream everybody looks at. But ultimately, it's money and power.
Yeah.
These are the two things that, in the strangest way, like, we have sufficient data to tell us that, that's not a good thing to go after. We've got enough of it, yet somehow we cannot help ourselves. And that always fascinates me. It's the fact that it's like my kids often, I'll tell them, and I think this is part of parenting. I'll tell them, don't do this. It's bad for you.
Well, you just put a sign on it with neon lights saying, come closer. Come
closer.
Right? That's the
human nature of it.
Right?
Yeah, the law. Like, you put out a law in there. It's just inviting. We can talk on that for a long time. But the point that I'm saying is that I think you're right in that there is this void, and success, whatever it may look like for people. Often, people will climb the top of the ladder, they'll get up there, they'll get their cars and so forth, so on, only to realize that, what, I'm not fulfilled. And I think that's what I'm really want to talk about, is what does fulfillment look like?
Yeah.
I love that word too. Fulfillment feels like full, like full.
Fill. It's got a double full and fill, like
full and fill.
Which full is kind of an already, like full is done and fill is an ongoing, right?
Oh, that's nice.
Right. So it's like, see, and I'm a big proponent of the both and, because often we pit one thing against the other, right? And so it's not like we go, well, no, it's not here, then we go look for it over here. But actually, to me, in my imagination at least, fulfillment would be all of it, in the sense of it's not an either or proposition.
Yes.
It's a both and proposition, right?
I agree.
So the opposite is not don't
Have
make money or don't, have fame or don't whatever. It's do that, but not without the other. Go for all of it. You know what I mean? Like have success, be successful at every layer. We talk about that, layers of your being, right?
Yeah.
So not only in your external world, but especially in your internal world, because that internal world is really, at the end of the day, the essence of who you are. And if you don't nurture and fill that, and I'm not a big fan of people prescribing one specific means to get there.
No.
There's
many ways.
For some it might be spirituality, for some it might be faith in God, for others it may be other things. I'm not worried about that, but the fact that, because it's a big, it's a big universe. There's all sorts of things that can address, that can nurture that you.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But we neglect it.
But that's
so much because we
devalue
why?
it.
But why?
Because we devalue it, and part of it is those, the tangibles versus the intangibles. I think often these are what we would consider to be the intangibles. It's not something that you can, measure. You can't go in there and go to your, spiritual bank and go, look, I'm full. Look at me. I think we take those things for granted. Often you hear this with people, when you have great health and you've got, great family and all this stuff, but let's just say that they may not have money. That becomes the primary thing. That becomes the focal point. But you're rich in all these areas too. And I think part of the challenge for all of us, I'm talking about in the Western society here, I'm not talking about other societies, but I think for us, it's what's consistently presented in front of us as the solution. So I think we're programmed and conditioned to think all the commercials that we watch, all the TV programming, all the, the stars and so forth, so on, that's programming us to think that is the thing to be pursued. That even though instinctively I think we know that's not where we're going to find happiness, whatever that looks like in the sense of fulfillment per se. But I think we were conditioned and trained from the time that you're young. What is the first thing people ask you? They don't ask you, who do you want to be? They ask you, what do you want to be?
Right.
And I think why is that though? What do you want to be? Because we're a culture that's obsessed with success and achievement and performance. And,
right.
And so when you make that the primary end goal in life, and when everybody these days, especially with social media, everybody wants to be a star and an influencer, then you begin to, I think, along the way, compromise. It's the whole idea of the story of the two brothers, they're Jacob and Esau, and how Esau was very hungry and so decides to sell his birthright for a bowl of soup. Why is that? Because he had a temporary need that he needed to satisfy.
Right.
He wasn't thinking about the long term in that moment. He was thinking about his hunger. But it says something really interesting. It says that he profaned his inheritance. And that word profane, we use it as in cussing, but it actually doesn't mean that. To devalue.
Right.
He didn't value it at all. And I think in our culture, that's the issue that I see, is that I think we devalue these things. they're not valued. You know, the metric for success in our culture is money and power. Well-being is really it's the key to those two things, actually, in some sense. Like if you're well-being, if you're well on the inside and you're happy, you can enjoy so much. You don't need a lot. But somehow we look to wealth and power. And even now, right now, what's happening right now in our culture, there is this mindset that says if we have power, then somehow we're going to have freedom. But power, that's not where the answer lies. It never is. Often power is actually once people have it, they have a hard time letting go, first of all. It corrupts. We talk about absolute power. So there is this idea in our culture for, we want more of something, and we associate having money with power,
But I want to go back to something we touched on earlier in this context, because we were talking earlier about the idea of being invited into a company, being included, and the idea of seeing the other people and the otherness and the different things or different ideas or different types of experiences or different people as adding to us, not subtracting from us. I think then this ties right in, because if before this whole seeking after power and money, there's something behind that, actually, which is this profound insecurity that says that, I'm under threat, that I will, there's winners and losers, right? And so you're either one or the other. So if you don't want to be a loser, I don't mean,
I got you.
You don't want to suffer loss, then you need to defend, you protect yourself. You need to amass power as a form of defense, right? I mean, even wars and everything, right? So, and because you're always feeling under threat, right? So that whole mindset of subtraction, like I'm going to be subtracted from. If you know what I mean, if somebody else succeeds, then if you have more, then I'll have less. That whole idea. So that whole mindset of insecurity or insufficiency is what drives this, right?
Yeah.
But that's, to me, what I think. In Christianity they talk about sin, but they've reduced it to sort of behavior and moral behavior, like, doing bad things, but it's not really that. It's really this sense of insufficiency. Literally, the word means to miss the mark, right? To not have enough, or to be in, like, to be insufficient, to it not being sufficient to do what it needs to do to hit the mark, right?
Yeah.
So out of that insufficiency, then we're grasping and we're in this defensive
mode
and selfish posture, right? Because we're under threat. We're constantly under threat, right? And so the idea of rewiring, talking about inside out, of rewiring ourselves to, and that's where, to me, that's what faith means to me. It isn't this sort of pie in the sky, whatever. It's saying, okay, do I trust that I will have enough? Right. And for me personally, even though I've moved away from a lot of the formal religion, I still attribute that trust to a being, a great being, a greater being than myself. But you can do that. You don't, if that doesn't work for you, that's fine. Some people talk about the universe or whatever, and the 12 steps is a higher power. It can literally be anything, right? But it's this whole, that's the essence of faith, right? This acknowledgement that there's something bigger than me, and that something will take care of me somehow, some way.
Yeah,
right.
I love it. Yeah,
and when you can do that, then you stop fighting for your power. We were talking about, like, as we're recording this, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, 2020, and I've been thinking so much about how the mask has come to symbolize this year. I'm a graphic artist, so I think in terms of icons and visuals, right? And the forever 2020 will be symbolized by the mask, and this whole idea. And there's these two cultural and physical pandemics happening simultaneously, right? There's the physical pandemic, which is causing us to need to wear masks, but there's also this cultural pandemic of particularly centered around the issue of racism, right? And both have been interestingly enough, simultaneously sort of happening.
Yeah.
And the slogan, if you will, not so much slogan, I don't mean to cheapen it, but the one of the prevailing phrases of this period of time of our history is "I can't breathe."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have the case of George Floyd, who was killed by the police, and one of his last cries or utterances was "I can't breathe." And then we have this pandemic, which is affecting people's lungs and is literally causing people not to be able to breathe, right? And so we're in this whole period of really, it feels very surreal, right? Like the whole world is being affected, right?
Yeah.
And so the mask has come to be the symbol of this time.
Yeah.
And I'm not in any way questioning the necessity of it from a medical or physical, but what it symbolizes is problematic, right? Because the mask is either to conceal one's identity, typically. I mean, that's typically.
Yeah.
You know, I said this the other day. I went to the bank, and now at this particular time, you cannot go into a public space without wearing a mask.
Correct.
Right? And so I went to the bank, and as I entered the bank, I put on a mask, and I said to the teller, I said, I never thought I would ever enter a bank and put on a mask. And had I done this, a year ago, I would have been tackled by security.
Correct.
And now I would be tackled by security for not wearing a mask. It's bizarre, right?
Yeah.
So, but typically, historically, a mask is to conceal. And even the concept of hypocrite.
Yes.
Right?
I was just thinking that.
The Greek word was the one who wears the mask.
Correct. The actor.
Right? The putting on an appearance other than your actual appearance, or concealing your appearance somehow, or disguising yourself.
Yeah.
Right? So that's one purpose for the mask. And the other one is self-protection, and which is the one, that is more tied into the physicality of, and also not to pass on, but that's also a protection, either protection of self, but it's a protective thing.
Measure,
right? So the idea of this powerful symbol of mask wearing now, that on the one level has become a physical necessity, but it also speaks to the times that we're in, where we are more than ever entrenched in protecting ourselves, right, from the perceived threat of the other, whether it's an ideological threat, whether it's a physical threat, whether it's a racial, whatever. We're embattled. We're under siege. We feel like we're under siege.
Yeah. That's so powerful. And one of the things that I think, I want to bring up here is it's often important for us to have context. And so when, it does feel like a movie right now because we're in it. We're the actors. And so sometimes we don't have the ability to be objective, to look outside of ourselves, and to be able to actually be aware enough to assess the issue objectively, because emotions play into this. So we're emotional beings. It's so really hard for us. I don't think for anybody who's out there, I don't care if they're a scientist or anything, it's very difficult for any of us to be really truly objective, because none of us are removed from it.
We're in it.
We're all in it.
Yeah.
So part of it is that we also have to, I think, embrace our humanity. And so this is often what I'm trying to get to people, is the fact that the greater threat, and I think you brought this up beautifully, is this idea of self-preservation and self-protection. Because once we go into that realm, we're done.
Well, yeah, because we're always in a form of war, right? And war is traumatic, and you're right, at any level.
At any level,
whether it's even if it's if you're like, you hear this very often. Like if you're in the middle of a divorce or whatever, that's like a war with that person, right? It's one of the most, so being at war with other people on any level. I'm not just talking about actual military conquest, although it applies to that too.
Yeah, correct.
But even in a day-to-day sense, when you're embattled, when you're, or your boss, or when you're at war with, when you feel you're under attack, and that your only option is to attack back in order to preserve yourself. That's it's very stressful.
Very much so.
But it's a very, like you said, we lose a perspective in that context because we're in survival mode.
Correct.
We're being fueled by fear and threat. And so we don't think the same way.
No.
Right?
No.
And the creativity, I mean, like that's, one of the things that, like, when a country's at war, right? Most of the sort of what would be considered, creative, the arts, architecture, building beautiful buildings, writing and putting on works of art, plays, music, museums, whatever, all of that, all of the resources go to the effort of the war.
Correct.
Thankfully, in our generation, we haven't experienced that like our parents did.
No.
So, there hasn't been that kind of situation for the Western type world since World War II.
Correct.
But, we've seen enough movies about it. We've heard the stories. We know what that's like. The society is complete. But now we're in a cultural type of war where we're seeing a lot of the same things.
Correct.
Where the arts have been almost shut down.
Correct.
Well, no, not entirely. I'm talking more about live.
Yeah, the live theater, live shows,
but that's a pretty important thing.
Yeah, it's a huge thing.
But and a lot of businesses have and restaurants and social, because when you're at war, you can't afford those things. You can't afford to go out and have a night at the pub and drink beer with your friends when we're at war.
Correct.
All of those priorities, get so the richness of life now, with the things that make life great, art and music and friends and leisure and all that. When you're at war, you can't afford those things.
Yeah.
Right. All your energies have to go to the protection. Right. So it's a sad state. Right.
It's a real sad state because it is the very thing that we need actually to help us get out of the state. When we're operating from that, fight or flight kind of, they talk about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic part of the brain, and that when you're operating from a state when your brain thinks it's under attack, it's going to go into self-preservation or it's going to go into attack mode. And I think part of the issue, and I was talking to a teacher today actually specifically about kids going back to school, and that subject matter came up, and he said, I'm not too concerned about the practical end of it. He says, I think, we'll figure that out. But what I'm concerned about is the long-term consequence.
Oh my gosh. It's huge.
So as a teacher, he's thinking about the long-term consequence, which we never account for. Often that's usually when you're in war, you're thinking about what? We're in war right now, so we got to put every resource and whatever that we have into fighting this thing. But then ultimately what happens is you might actually end up creating even a greater mess. And I think that's something that we, right now in this period of time, I think whether it's leaders, whether it's we as individuals and citizens, we're not thinking from that creative side of our brain.
Right. So coming back full circle, we were talking about power, because we're sort of triggered that particular thought in me when you were talking about power, particularly, right? We need to then, how do we get out of this mess as a society, right? As individuals, how do we get out of this mess? Well, we have to go to that fundamental place where that thing which we carry, which is our humanity, our value, our worth, which, as you said, we have devalued, that needs to come back up in value.
Yes.
Right? And then we have to recognize and be willing to take the risk of being vulnerable enough to let down our defenses, and because we trust that cannot be taken from us.
Correct.
Right? That's full circle.
Exactly
where we were talking about
that's it.
That line from. So, I love this, which is something that's very ironic in this time right now. It is a time in history when, at least in our society, where you cannot be vulnerable in some ways, because any sign of weakness, any sense of it's just pounced.
Cancel culture.
It's like blood in the water for sharks. So we all are literally wearing masks, and we're all pretending, and we're all holding our breath and hoping that nobody will pounce.
Yeah.
And we don't want to give them anything to pounce on, right? And yet, ironically, there's one of the people who's very, very famous now is Brené Brown, and her whole thing's about vulnerability.
Correct.
And about letting down our armor. And I love her definition of vulnerability, because I used to think it was I typically was thinking is like being disclosive. Like, I'm going to tell you something about me, like that I'm really afraid or something, right? Yeah, but that's not really it. Vulnerability, the way I understood, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but the way I understood her defining it is putting yourself or being willing to be in a position, whether it's in a relationship, in a job situation, in how you function in the world, where you cannot control the outcome.
That's it.
That's true vulnerability, right? And so this idea of control and power. So the escalation now, both politically and socially, is to armor up more. Yeah. To gain, and she did this incredible study. And again, I don't want to misquote her because this is just off the top of my head. So I would ask anybody who's listening to this to actually go look into the specifics of this. Yeah, yeah. But the idea of it was, because she's a researcher, right? And she's done, it's data-driven stuff. It's not just these sort of philosophical ideas, but it's data-driven stuff. And she did all this research with all these very successful people, like high-achieving CEOs and celebrities and so forth. And she went into it thinking, probably the thing that holds them back the most is fear. And the research that she uncovered and surprised her was that it wasn't that. What was holding them back wasn't fear, because they all had fear, but they just operated in spite of it. But it was the thing that most held them back was what you call armoring up. Their armor, that they self-protection, their
self-preservation.
Yeah. She calls it armoring up. And the irony is, we think by armoring up, we are preserving and protecting ourselves, and we're actually killing ourselves. We're suffocating in our armor.
That's it.
And the very risky, the new courage in this time, I think, is to have the vulnerability to not take up power, but to lay it down.
That's it.
And it's scary.
It is very scary.
But until we start doing that, the cycle is not going to be reversed. Because if you just escalate, you get more weapons, I get more weapons. You get more weapons, I get more weapons. We escalate. The
cycle continues.
That goes nowhere.
But that's the story of humanity. Historically, we see that the victims ultimately become the victimizers. And whether I come from a country where it's been in a perpetual state of war for a long time, and it's fascinating that the very people that freed my people from a dictator ended up becoming.
Well, you see that even like, for example, like when you at college or whatever, right? Yeah. The freshmen always get hazed.
Yes, and then once they climb up,
and then 2-3 years later, they're the ones doing the hazing, right? And it's a cycle, right?
Correct.
And so it's like, when I don't have power, I'm using the term very loosely here, but I get abused.
Yeah.
And so therefore now, out of that pain and out of that experience, I determine whenever I do get some power, I'm going to abuse back, because that's what you do with power.
Correct.
Right? But I think it's time for a reframing of what we do with power.
Correct.
And to me, and again, I'm not pushing this on anybody, I'm not evangelizing or anything like that, but to me, that's what I love about what I understand to be what Jesus demonstrated and stood for, where he said, let me show you a different use of power. Let me show you that the way I use power is for your sake, not for my sake. I use it to serve you, not to serve myself or to you know what I mean?
Advance
and so
agendas,
I love that. And that, to me, that is what makes me very, very interested in Jesus, because it's literally a complete redefinition of power. It's saying the most powerful person has no need to exercise that power in an oppressive way. In fact, the opposite.
Exactly.
He uses that power to set oppression free, to fight against oppression, to tear down systems and oppressive whatever.
Structures,
right? That's what the power is for. It's
Correct.
to defend the defenseless, to defend the underdog, to defend the weak, not to defend myself.
Correct.
Because I don't need to, because I have the power.
Well,
it's this confidence, right? Right?
Yeah.
So I don't need to grab for something that I have and I can't lose.
No. And I love it because it's that term that I've used recently when I think I wrote a post, and it was all on the word meekness. And that word meekness means, it doesn't mean weakness in the sense that, it's power, unreserved power. It's one recognizing their power and their authority. It's like a parent, you have power over that child, but you don't use your power because you recognize the damage that you could cause.
You never specifically, you don't ever use it against. And to me, that's one of the most destructive and frustrating views of God that is out there. That is actually held by a lot of Christianity, but it's actually also held by a lot of atheist people, because it's the God who is an abuser of power.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, and goes out there.
And that's not
true at all.
How I understand it to be. In fact, it's the opposite. It's a God who doesn't use his power against us.
No.
In the same way, you brought up being a parent, right? Because and a lot of people, that's one of the big hang-ups that we have about God, where we often say, well, if God is all powerful, then why doesn't he do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we also don't want him to be the kind of power that comes in
the form that we
sort
don't
of
want
imposes itself,
Correct.
right? So we can't have them both ways.
Yeah, it's
right?
true. It's true.
Right. And I just heard, as I was driving here, this brilliant, and again, I'm not quoting it word for word, but it was William Paul Young, the author of The Shack, who I love him, and he was on a podcast I was listening to on the way here, and he made this statement. He said, God, the nature and the love of God is so non-coercive that even though we find ourselves in prisons, probably exclusively of our own making, both as individuals and also as a race. Yeah. I mean, look at our environmental mess. Yeah. We have caused ourselves a lot of problems. Yeah. Right?
Correct.
And God is watching this, but he is so non-coercive that he will not yank us out of our prison, through the bars, even for our own good. What he will do is he will enter the prison with us, sit with us, and love us until we voluntarily exit the prison.
Wow.
That's what I understand the nature of God to be.
Yeah.
That's a compelling.
Correct.
That lets me then go, okay, if that's true, and if that's the kind of God that's behind all this, I can let my guard down now. Then I can begin then to engage other people without being at war with them.
Correct.
And it's the only way out, even as a humanity. Never mind, going to heaven and all that kind of stuff. Just now, today, as we engage with other people, because as long as we're wearing our masks, and again, I'm not talking about physically. No. I get the need for it from that, but philosophically speaking, relational, as long as we're wearing our masks to either conceal ourselves or to defend ourselves, we're not going to have healthy community. We're not going to have the wrongs that need to be righted, the injustices, the social, the economic, the racial injustices. Somebody's going to have to let their mask down and take the first step.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Peace.
And that's great leadership. Nelson Mandela is one person that I think so I don't know of any other man that has done that, in the sense of actually having the power and then ultimately giving up that power. Most people don't.
But the rewiring for me is power.
Correct. That's exactly what power is. Exactly.
That's real power.
Yeah. Because the person that is not corrupted by that power, he or she is saying something. They're saying something really powerful in that ability to withstand it and to be able to actually give it up. To say that, you know what, my identity is not defined by my position or money or any of those status, any of those things that we usually attribute to somebody who is powerful. Because power, and this is the thing, I think we have a wrong definition of power in our culture today.
I agree.
And so part of the conversation, I think this could help even the generation that's coming up, is to help them redefine what true power looks like. Because you're right, power is not what we're seeing and what's being modeled for for this generation anyways. And I think we need to go back and revisit that. And I think it's a necessary conversation. It's a difficult conversation to have because I understand the enticement of it.
Oh, yeah.
I totally get it. Because it is the easy road. In some ways it is. Even you think about it, lobbyists, what are they doing most of the time? They're trying to lobby people of power, positions of power.
To get more of it or to protect the power that they have.
That's it. They're doing it. They're cheating the system often. That's what they're doing. Because if you really wanted to have true power, well, then you engage with people at a ground level and you begin to get your message out there, and you have it tested and you discuss it, and ultimately if it's a great idea and if it merits people's attention, it will get its attention. But often in our culture, and this is why we're seeing so much corruption, is that often people are circumventing and getting to the.
But that's what I mean, because we're back to that same theme. And, we're talking about it at a large scale.
Yes, of course.
If you bring it down to the individual right?
level, yeah.
Again, if I don't value and believe that what I have is compelling enough for you to be attracted to it, then I have to either deceive you or somehow manipulate or coerce you into doing what I want.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. As opposed to saying, just being who I am and letting you be
exactly.
either you and attract you in that sense, without coercion.
Correct.
I don't trust that. I don't trust myself, and I don't trust you. So I have to manipulate or coerce you or deceive you in one form or another in order to get what I need or what I want from you. That's the whole basis of where we're at.
And sadly,
right now, right?
What that does is it creates actually greater disconnection, and so it pushes us further and further apart. My wife and I are currently doing a marriage course, and it's been revolutionary for me because it's making me understand the importance of listening, and the whole concept of the and I hope I do it justice. It's by Dr. Glenn, and what we're learning is that we as humans there's this connection code. We're created for connection. So the key is that often in any relationship, when there's a relational breakdown, it's often because there's a disconnection. So you're disconnected. There's walls that are being built up. And so that's, often people will say in a marriage, it could be one of the loneliest places because even though you're together, if there is that disconnection, it could feel like, it's like this big, massive dam is between you and it's a very isolating feeling. And so what's happening there is that there is a disconnection. So how do you gain that connection? And I think this could speak at a micro level and also macro level. So on a relational level, if every time you share something to me, an emotion that you have, so you tell me, hey, Joe, you know what, I'm afraid. And if I enter into a correction and say, Dale, why are you afraid of? There's no reason to be afraid of. Come on, buddy, look around you. So what we're doing is not validating that emotion. Yeah. We're saying that emotion is wrong.
That's right.
And so what happens to people then is that they learn very quickly that emotions are bad. And so they stuff them down. So also what you're going to learn in that relationship is Joe's not be trusted.
I'll take it a step further. They don't only learn that the thing is bad, that I must be bad for having it in the first place.
Shame,
right?
So, but this is the thing. So for me, and it's been revolutionary in a sense that in my relationship, what I'm learning now is that emotions, and this is just, I think all of us, especially men, we've learned that emotions are bad to some extent, that we're not supposed to show emotion. And, we always have that picture of that, the real guys don't cry and all those things that we have. And that's part of the conditioning. So we learn to stuff them. But when we experience another's emotion, for example, for me, tears, I associate tears with bad for some reason.
Weakness.
Totally. That's the key word, weakness.
Okay.
And so when I see that, I go, oh, let's get this person. Like even with my kids, I used to say, stop crying. What's going on? Why are you crying? It's not a big deal. But what's happening, and this is the thing, is that it's just an emotion. And this is the way Dr. Glenn defines it. This emotion is something that happens to us. And I love that. It's like all of us were created. We're emotional people. So emotions happen to us. There's certain things that we can't necessarily stop them. What we can obviously do is our behavior. We don't necessarily, just because I feel angry, I don't have the right to go and punch you. Like, I mean, we're responsible for our behavior, but that emotion that we have, that needs to be validated. So what in our culture, what's happening right now, I think, is we're not good at doing that.
Well, I would say in the example you just gave,
Yeah.
if you're angry, say at me,
Yeah.
and your anger was validated, you wouldn't need to punch me.
Correct.
Right? But if your anger is suppressed, it's like the volcano. It's like the pressure cooker, right? There's certain things that the more you suppress them, the more you empower them.
Correct.
Emotions are like that, especially what we consider negative emotions. The more, don't cry, stop crying, the more that, don't be angry. The more we try and suppress those emotions, we actually pressurize them, and they might go dormant for the moment, but they are now accumulating, and eventually that's where you get I mean, I don't want to be too whatever, but I mean, mass shootings and stuff. I mean, it's the end of a long set of people who have just feel they have nothing else, no other way to express themselves.
No, that's beautiful.
Because they haven't been seen, heard, validated. So I think it's huge. So it goes back to that whole thing we talked about at the beginning, about this whole thing of embracing and welcoming other people for their otherness and not trying to impose ourselves on them.
No.
But just see and hear and embrace otherness.
Correct.
And not feel threatened, not look at it as a threat, but look at it as an opportunity, as a good thing, as a value, a beautiful addition to our life. So, I mean, this circles right back, right?
That's it. And that's the beauty of it all. And it's a two-way street. And so part of the challenge for us as humans, I guess, as a culture, that we often are threatened by ideas that we may not necessarily agree with, because we think of them as being the wrong ideas, for example. But if we're going to have a civility in our culture, we have to have that ability to respect. So you and I don't necessarily have to agree on everything, but we can have a conversation. And we may not even come to a conclusion, but we can learn to respect each other.
But do you say then, I'm just thinking this in the moment, do you think then the first goal of conversation is connection?
Mm-hmm.
And we often make the first goal correction.
Correct.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then so we short circuit something and we bypass a very necessary. So once there's connection, then there can be correction. Because not all ideas are good.
No.
Right?
No.
But if you don't connect with me, even if I have a bad idea, you're not going to change my mind.
No. Everything starts from a place of marketing or any of those things that we talk about. It starts with what? It starts with connection first. Before you can make the offer, before there's quote unquote a conversion, there has to be something that happens. They first have to know you, then they have to like you. And then from there, trust is established that they're willing to listen to you. And I think we do bypass, we do it in the wrong order. Often what we do is we present our ideas, what I call our offers. Look at me, my offer is really good for you. This could change your life. But there's no connection.
Well, because again, you're skipping steps that are so essential, and you're trying to shortcut, and in shortcutting, you actually shoot yourself in the foot in the end, right?
Correct.
And so is this part of the idea behind this podcast and this forum that you're starting here, the idea of making space for these conversations, not always with the need or the agenda to change or correct? That may happen, but more for the idea of just for the sake of, having a place where people can come and express their thoughts, their ideas, and even more importantly, what's behind them. What are those ideas doing for you? Like even as I was describing earlier, right? I'm not interested in converting anybody to believing in Jesus. Like I'm done with that version, right? But I'm interested in expressing how much believing in Jesus does for me.
Correct.
It does wonders for me.
Love it.
Okay. And I don't need you to take that up.
No.
But I love for you to hear. And so I think that's another issue is sometimes as we debate ideas and theologies and ideologies, and that's great. And there's a place for that. And that's interesting. And I enjoy doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But we fail to often ask the question, what does that idea do for you?
That's it.
That's really more important.
That's it.
Right.
And that's what I'm interested in. And I think often with even that word inside out, and I've talked about this, is that I think of it, and it's layered. That word is incredibly layered in the sense that it's the way we see. So part of, most of us are challenged with this idea that we're always externally driven. So we look from the outside in. But I think the best way to look at our lives, at the world, is from the inside. So inside out, because that's a beautiful way of looking at the world. So it's a vantage point, I think that, and I'm interested in what people house on their inside.
Yeah, me too.
And I think, sometimes we're, and this is what we've been talking about in the sense that we look at the facade, we look at the externals, but then we miss out what people carry. And I think some of the deepest, for me anyways, relationally, like you and I have been longtime friends, and it's been incredibly transformative to my life because of our relationship. Different backgrounds, we come from very different places even. If you think about it, it's fascinating that what connects us then. It's really how we see. I think the way you and I view the world, it allows, it's this, there's curiosity, and there's always this, one of the things that you do really well is you look at the world from a 360 view. And so often if I have an idea or a perspective, I bring it to you because I know you're going to help me to see it from different vantage points.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because we're stuck with a vantage point no matter where we are, ideologically, physically, right? But we can move around and we can expose ourselves to different vantage points to get a fuller picture. And often we don't want to do that work, right?
No.
And so we think, if you go to the Grand Canyon, if you're standing at the top of it looking down, it looks very different than if you're standing at the bottom of it looking up, or if you're flying overhead, or if you're looking at it from the north and from the west and from the east. And so the grand, I talk about this a lot when we talk about, this idea of objective truth and whatever. Christianity, again, is very big on this is the truth. And yeah, I believe in objective truth, but we only ever have a subjective perspective on the objective truth. So we have to be humble enough to go, yeah, I may be looking at capital T objective truth, but I'm looking at it from a specific angle. And if I stand over there, that same truth will look different to me. The truth didn't change, but my perception of it will change as I move around. So this idea of exposing ourselves back to the thing we were talking about with Netflix or whatever, if we're only ever feeding ourselves the same ideological, theological perspective, then how can we even have any confidence in that? Because we haven't allowed ourselves to sort of move around it and view it from different angles, from other people's eyes, from other trajectories where people are coming from. Because I think that's always a huge part of it, where somebody's coming from.
Correct.
Will, color their experience of something. So the very same thing might be traumatic to one person and might be life-giving to another person. I just had this conversation with another friend of mine, and we were talking about a church that we both attended as young, years and years ago. And it's their story to tell. I'm not going to tell their story, but from where they were coming from in their life, that church was massively beneficial. It literally probably had a great deal to do in actually saving their life.
Wow.
And for myself and another set of people, that church experience was fairly traumatic. Well, they're both legitimate things. They're both legitimate experiences, right? But it's a trajectory, right? And it's so easy to look at another person who's going in a different direction and say, "Oh, you're wrong." But they're not wrong. They're coming, like you live in the east end of the city, literally, and I live in the the west end of the city. And, for us to visit each other, you have to travel west and I have to travel east. Well, it would be very easy for one of us to go, you're going the wrong way, right? You're going the opposite way that I'm going. What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But it's trajectory.
Yeah.
We're going to the same place, but you're coming from over there, so you have to travel in this direction, and I have to travel in what appears to be the opposite direction to you, and yet we're going to the same place. How about that for an optical illusion, right? So we have to be very careful that or very open to other people's trajectories. Where are they coming from? Why do they believe this idea, and what is it doing for them? And I might find this idea horrific, but for them, if they're coming from a different place, or it might be a very helpful and useful, right? And again, not all of them. That's part of the conversation. Let's talk. And then you see it from mine. We see it from, and we position ourselves. It's like the camera, right? It's like the camera in a movie. We go from different. Well, how would a boring movie, when you don't have different angles, right? I mean, that's filmmaking 101, right? Yeah. So the idea of us having this kind of scenario where we can talk to each other, and obviously guests from different backgrounds, different experiences, different perspectives, point of view. That's wonderful. That's rich. That's hugely beneficial, and we can only gain from that.
That's it. And I think that's the ultimate goal of this, podcast, is first to enter into a conversation. And I think if we can't have good conversations, then we're not going to have great societies. And so it all starts with a conversation. What I love about kids often is, I grew up in a environment where it was multiracial. You've got the white guy over here, you got the Lebanese guy over there, you got the African guy there. There was a whole set of groups that I, hung out with. But the reason why we didn't necessarily look at each other through the prism of race is because we looked at each other through our relationship.
Yes. Wow.
So I never said to myself, oh, my friend Sasha is white and my friend Dwight is black. And I talked about my friend Sasha and what we did together and what we were about and the connection that we had. And so I think part of the purpose of this podcast is to give people another vantage point on what even is happening right now in culture. Just to let people see that, hey, you know what, guys? We actually have a lot more in common. I was saying this as a joke recently because when this whole Black Lives Matter thing got really heightened and stuff like that, I started doing, you start to research into stuff. And I was doing some research about my history, and I realized I'm Habesha. And so I was looking at the term Habesha, what it meant. And I was just like, oh, what does Habesha mean, And my mom had told me, but I wanted to, look at it. I wanted to see the definition of it. It actually meant mixed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, interesting, mixed. And as I started to look at my heritage and where I came from, I realized I'm a mismatch of so many different parts.
Wow.
And, and in that moment, I had this sense of like, wow, now I understand why I'm the way I am. That I love, when a beautiful recipe often is a mix of different things.
Right. All these different ingredients coming together.
And to make this amazing
the combination of those flavors that brings something unique that even individually those flavors can't even compete with. But that's another point. We should embrace that, right? Like that typically that's seen as a negative.
No.
Right?
Yes.
But yeah, this idea and there's both. And again, I'm a big proponent of the and instead of the but. And so there is something about having a uniqueness to your identity and valuing your your cultural specificity.
Yes.
As opposed to just becoming this nothingness of everythingness and nothingness at the same time. There's something that's valuable about that, and but there's also something that's valuable about intermingling it and not using those as silos and separators, but beginning to say, okay, because the reality is we're all complicated. We're all maybe not racially, but we're mixed.
Yeah.
Even in our opinions, we don't all We're not all in a clean cut line. And that's part of the problem today. We're only given those choices.
Correct.
You're either, Christian or atheist. You're either liberal or conservative. You're either, for Trump or against Trump, and, or whatever. But the reality, the majority of us are all sorts of shades in between, and on one thing I'll be more over here, and one thing I'll be over here. I don't want to be lumped into that.
No.
Don't call me right wing or left wing. I'd like to be all wings and no wings. Like, you know what I mean? In the sense that and I think we need to give people more latitude to not have to fall into a clean label, this or that.
Correct. Yeah, it's nuance.
We are mixed, and that's a good thing is what I'm getting at.
Correct. It is a very good thing. I actually love the idea of contradictions. And I used to think that was a bad thing. But that's what makes us human. One of my favorite comedians is Dave Chappelle. I love Dave Chappelle.
I love him.
I mean,
yes.
But what makes him unlike any other comedian is the contradictions.
Right.
You can never, ever predict what Dave Chappelle is going to say about a subject matter. And that's why people listen to him.
Yeah.
But
and also, frankly, why a lot of people don't.
Well, of course. But that's the beauty. But that's part of the reality of life is, this idea of polarity in the sense that you can be polarizing. I mean, anytime I have an opinion, an idea, somebody's going to disagree with me. My goodness, my wife disagrees with a lot of stuff I say and do. That's just the nature of life. I'm not looking for everybody to go, oh, wow, I agree with 100% what Joe says. No, we're human. And so we are always going to have parts and pieces of us that sometimes don't even fit. But that's what makes life so exciting.
But that's why even within a single idea, that's what I love. To me, that's the inside out. I love to look beyond the idea and pull on the idea and say, hey, what is it about this idea? Some things I could say are bad or things that I don't like about this, but there's something in this idea, probably in most cases. I mean, I don't want to be all for all. There are some ideas that are probably full on bad, like racism, like the idea that one race is superior to another. That's a pretty full on bad idea. There's not too much in that idea that is helpful, but in the majority of ideas, there are aspects that are useful. I can't tell you how many books I've read, especially like Christian type books, where I vehemently disagree with the conclusion. Like I could write a whole other book like opposite to what that book espoused as a theology or whatever. And yet I found some very useful things for my life in that book, things that I can use.
That's it.
So it's not this all or nothing, bad, good, black, white, good, evil. It's the pulling out the nuances, saying, okay, what's in here? Where's this coming from? What can I use? What can I learn? What can this even hear? The hearing of this idea again, back to the thing we were talking about with the Broadway. I don't have to become a champion of this idea. I don't have to now take your idea and make it my life's mission or wear the t-shirt or become whatever you are. I can just hear the idea, hear you out, and take from it whatever benefits me and not worry and leave behind what doesn't, and not have to attack you and tear you down. Because for you, that idea is your t-shirt idea, the one that you'll wear the t-shirt, that you'll go out into the world and I'm not going to do that with that idea. That's not the idea that I want to. I don't have that level of passion for it, but I can still see some relevance to it. I can still be informed by it. I can still be added to by just hearing it and just being exposed to it and trying to see it from the inside, from your eyes, not just the idea itself, what's behind it. I'm always interested in what's behind it.
The motivation. That's the most powerful part. And that and you can only get there by having, you got to dig deep. And unless you do that, you won't be able to. And I think that is
well, again, the only way then is to not perceive it as a threat.
That's the key.
Because as soon as like they go back to that, then I'll armor up. I'm not gonna, I'm gonna protect my space. I'm not gonna let you, but say, okay, there's no threat here. I can, and to seek connection over correction first and say, hey, how can I connect with this person, A, and then how can whatever this person brings into my sight, into my, how can it help me connect better with myself, with that person, that true me, that real me, bringing it back to what we said at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So having that sort of as the main agenda is connection as opposed to correction.
Correct. I love it. I
Right.
keep saying that. You see that?
I like
Yeah.
Correct.
What I'm interested in, and I think this is the primary thrust of the podcast, is that individual that is behaving a certain way, whether it's good or right, I don't, whatever. They're dealing with all sorts of stuff on the inside that we often don't see. And I think this is what even in our culture right now, what I'm seeing is this, it's often this, and I've seen this now so often that I can actually kind of language it. It's that people are looking for external solution for an internal problem.
Yes, that's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
So most people are out there screaming and yelling for justice and all these different things. Really, what they're looking for is for love, for affirmation. They're looking for something on the inside. And so what I want to tell people is that, there is this model that says, you got to wait for the external circumstance to change in order for you to change. And there is that model. But also there is, I think, a different model which says that, you can change things from the inside out. That you're the cause of change, that you can become that. And I think that's an empowering message to all of us. We need it. Like I need to hear an empowering message that tells me that, hey, Joe, you know what? This has been the struggle of my life. I have chased many things, and I think we all have, externally, because I thought, okay, this thing, maybe that thing. And there's a lot of people out there, they think, okay, when I get here, when this happens and so forth, so on, then things will change. But the reality is until you change, and this is the power of it, like I was just talking to a client today, and it was so powerful. And we were just having this coaching call, and I said, how you doing? And she said, amazing. On Friday, she wasn't. And I said, what changed? She said, the circumstance has not changed, but the way I'm viewing it has changed. All mindset.
And again, because I'm very sensitive
I
to
know
this,
you. That's why you're here.
But I would caution that it's not, again, a substitute. It's both. So I would say it's because sometimes, especially when we're talking, you brought up the word justice, there are legitimate injustices that are injustices, period. And no amount of, and I know you're not saying this, that's why I'm not correcting you, but I'm filling in something, especially for someone who might be listening, who might hear in that saying, oh, just kind of get over it. Just,
I hope not.
It's not that. It's both and, right?
Yes.
But that sense of what I know your heart to be about that is like, the personal power of a human being. I mean, really, that's what's been unjustly treated, away, right? The dignity, the value, the worth,
correct,
the voice, the presence, the all of that, right? I mean, all of that injustice. So at the greater levels, it plays itself out in specific ways, but really that's what it's all about, right?
I agree.
So it's, to me, it's a both end. If we attack it from both ends, sometimes we are actual victims of something.
Oh yeah,
legitimate victims, right? And we victimize ourselves. So if we can do both, where we can say, begin to take up our own power over even terrible things, and that whole idea of seeing them with a different eye, perspective, attitude, all that's important, but that's not the entire solution. You know what I mean? There's
ultimately you have to experience, the idea of like, and this, we see this in Christianity often, where people are praying for years and years and they haven't necessarily come to the experience of the very thing that they've been believing for. And that's a tortured life sometimes, living that way. I'm not saying that, hey, Joe, like just focus on the, internal things and forget what's happening externally. I think what I'm trying to propose, and I didn't communicate it well, is this, that I think when you start to do the work on the inside, it starts to have impact on the outside. In that you are, and I think you said it beautifully, and this is that you start to you take your power back, and you begin to understand that, yes, I've been victimized and these things have happened to me, but you start to go through that process, that journey of healing. And in that process, you begin to separate yourself from that. Like sometimes you can't, because if you're if you're a slave, for example, it doesn't matter.
Well, that's what I mean.
You're confined in a horrific situation. But
you literally need that oppressive, system that's keeping you a slave to be lifted off your back. It's not just about get a good attitude.
No.
Right.
I agree.
But again, to me, that's why I think it's both and.
Correct.
Both
I like
and.
that. I like that both.
Because it's not either or. Because it can be. Because a lot of sort of self-help kind of stuff is all about just think positive kind of idea and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
And that's kind of bullshit. But it's also not true. But it's helpful. But it's combined with actual change. So right now we need both. We need people to take up their personal power and take their personal my favorite line, coming back to Broadway, my favorite line in Hamilton is from one of the songs that Aaron Burr sings, and he says, I am the one thing in life I can control. And then he says, I am an original. I am inimitable. I am an original. I am the one thing in life I can control. And he's frustrated in that moment because Hamilton keeps winning at everything and Burr keeps every opportunity that Burr wants, Hamilton gets. And he's frustrated and he's jealous and he's mad. And eventually it leads him to actually kill Hamilton in the end. Oh, spoiler. Everybody knows that. It starts at the beginning because the very first song, he says, I'm the damn fool who shot him. So no spoiler. But anyways, that line, I am the one thing in life I can control. I think that's what you're talking about. Exactly. I love that.
Yes,
I love that.
That's it.
Right. But then, too, there is a call now in our society is where we need to also change some things that are going on the outside.
Oh.
We all need to link arms. We need to address those things. We need to see those things changed at the,
and all
politically and economically and whatever. So it's not an either or. It's a both and.
Yeah, it's both. Yeah. And I think those are the great, civil rights leaders or any, people that we look up to. That's what they were brilliant at, was even, I'll use Nelson Mandela. It's a great classic example of somebody who in prison found freedom. Such a, you want to talk about paradox.
Yeah.
How did he do that? Is that he learned that hate was only fueling his oppressors. And so when he learned the act of freedom, and I loved it. It's kind of subversive in some sense. It's really cool because it's like this whole concept and idea of loving your enemy. It's that what it did was it was a behavior that was not normal, and these prisoners didn't understand why with this guy. No, we're his prisoners, and that somehow because of forgiveness, he started to gain favor from his own captors. And he actually develops a relationship with his prison guards. That's a power. So what I'm saying ultimately is that I think, yes, it's not an either or thing.
That's right. I think that's the main thing I want to leave, because a lot of times it is kind of positioned as an either or. No, because ultimately. And by doing one thing, you're putting the other. Not you. I mean, in general. Like often I hear that. That's one of the things that bothers me sometimes, because it's like people put forth some great stuff, but they do it in a way that implies that either this is the answer, this one thing, and it's a collection of things. It's a system. That's why we talk about systemic now. It's a big word, systemic racism and systemic injustice. And we're so wildly individual in our mindset as sort of Western modern people that we forget that it's both. So yes, I'm huge for the individual power. I'm huge about that, and like we started that conversation, that's the one thing in us, that true self, the true thing that who we are, that transcends our bodies and our this essence of who we are, and that we often neglect, we often devalue in pursuit of external things. I'm such a champion of that. I want everybody, and that's if there's anything I want to contribute to the world, is being able to somehow, I have no idea how, but somehow inspire more self-confidence in that sense, in that true self. And I think that can only then be beneficial toward contributing to the systems and the society, because society at the end of the day is a collection of a bunch of individuals.
Yeah, that's it.
So I'm a big proponent of individual power, because I think a whole bunch of powerful, in the sense that we said it earlier, that use power for the common good, for the service of each other, for the uplifting of each other, for the advancing of humanity and advancing of science and advancing of everything. If that's how power is used, then the more individual powerful people there are, collectively we have a powerful society, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's both and. Like, I agree. Totally,
Yeah.
I'm a huge proponent of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think when we start to do the inner work, it does kind of, and this is and I'm learning this in my own personal life. And I mean, I say this often to people, the first thing that you need to do is the inside work, because that's the work that is really challenging, because we wake up every day with these voices. I feel like voices in our head, that tell us we're not good enough, and that are disqualifying us. And so sometimes we have to learn to silence that lower version of ourselves, so that we can show up in that version of ourselves that is...
Well, that's the challenge. And for me, that's still the most difficult journey.
That's the journey all of us are on.
That's, if I could rise up to that level of, believing in myself. And as you know, that's one of my big struggles, self-confidence and all that, and shame and all that. Then what greater of a value would I be to the world that I'm in? Like, me being down on myself and beating myself up, which I do to this very day. Mm-hmm. And you talked about Achilles heel. That's my Achilles heel. Yeah. And so I say it from not from a practitioner of the right version of this, from really a person who's very, very much still dogged by this, still entrapped by my own, the energy that I spend tearing myself down and apart. If I converted even a half of that energy to contributing something to the world, I could really do something, but I still devote so much energy to tearing myself down, to putting myself down. And I don't think I'm alone in that.
No.
I think that's something that's another pandemic of self. Maybe hatred is too strong a word, but like we said, of not truly valuing who we are and what we are and what we're capable of, and what the light that we can be to the world around us. That's huge. And so again, to me, that would be something, because for me, I suffer from that so much. It's something that I very much want to be a part of. If I could somehow do that for others, if I can somehow get other people to believe in themselves more and to love themselves more, even where I failed to do that for myself, that to me would be something that I would like to leave behind or to aspire to.
That's so cool. And isn't that the best revenge?
Yeah, and even if I never quite master it for myself.
Yeah.
Because back to the first thing we said, maybe as, I'm not saying officially in the role, but as a type of coach or whatever, in the sense that I can help others do what I cannot do for myself. That would be very rewarding to me.
I think that's the definition of a coach. That was the realization I had. I came to this place, especially one who is a pastor, and I thought to myself, after my burnout, I'm at the lowest point. I'm dealing with severe anxiety. I'm just, you saw me then, and I couldn't even enjoy the presence of my kids. And I'm a playful, joyful kind of guy. So to really truly experience depression and anxiety at that level, actually that really allowed me to have a level of compassion for what you've gone through, your mental health challenges. It really, because in that moment, there's nothing you can do to get out of it.
Right.
There's no amount of pep talk, no amount of friends. The only thing you have is this hopelessness that you're faced with day in, day out. And the idea of having to live another day, carrying this, it was just such a monumental task. And I thought, wow, here I am, just can't even live life. Like I can't even do just the little things that any ordinary person can do. So of course the shame, this all that stuff that comes up makes it even worse. But the point that I'm trying to make though is that in that moment, I asked myself this. I said, how is it that I can help so many people, but yet I can't do the very thing I've been able to do for others for myself? And that's when I realized, wow, I do need help. And I think freedom is that ultimately when we can come to that place and recognize that, you know what, I can't do this alone. I can't do this on my own. And I think we talked about as a society, even a lot of these issues are above our pay grades. Most of the scientists don't even know what's happening most of the times. They're just speaking based on the knowledge that they currently have, but often they're trying to figure it out. And so there is this moment of realization we need each other. And I needed a coach. I needed people to come along.
Yeah, and it may not be a formal thing.
No, it's not a formal.
It may be just like in our case, we naturally do that with each other.
Correct.
But it's not a formal. We don't pay each other or hire. But we play this role. So sometimes it's out of a relationship. Sometimes, I would recommend anybody who, if you can't afford it, because it's very difficult to afford. Sometimes therapy is an amazing thing, and it plays a different role. So it's not an either or both end, right? No. But this is wonderful because it really ties back to me to saying, hey, look, trajectory again, right? So again, seeing it from two perspectives, okay? So ideally, perhaps, you become a type of expert in something, and not necessarily formally in terms of training, but in terms of actually mastering something to some extent. And out of that mastery, then you're able to now teach other people. So that's one model.
Yeah.
And that's the more common model. And that's totally, absolutely powerful. The other model, talking about trajectory, the one I'm the one I'm using now for myself is say, okay, but here's an area in my life where I don't know that I'm not there yet. And I'm waiting until I master this before I feel that I have any use in the world. Well, I'm not getting any younger. I might not master this, not sufficiently to my level of where I feel like. So then trajectory. So what I'm determining to do with that is saying, okay, this area I'm not mastering, but I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that to serve. I'm going to, if I can't do it for myself, I'm going to do what I can to help other people. And it's a totally different paradigm, right? But that's the one that's motivating me now because it finally gets me to the point. Otherwise, I'm not going to do anything for the rest of my life. I'm going to be quiet because I'm never good enough. I never feel good enough.
No.
So it's like saying, I'm going to take the very thing, my Achilles heel, and I'm going to use it because it's all I got.
That's it.
I don't have something that I can point to that I've mastered. So then, am I bankrupt? No, I have something. My weakness is something. I can use it for this to serve. That can become my power. My superpower can be my kryptonite can be my superpower. That's the kind of mind shift I'm going through right now. I'm going, wow, all of a sudden, I have some hope. I go, oh, well, that's I do have powerful. That. I was hiding that thing because I didn't like it. Because I didn't think it had any value. I devalued it. But maybe if I flip the script, maybe that is the value that I have. So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
That's amazing.
So this is interesting. So we're going to obviously get a chance to unpack this kind of stuff with lots of other guests you got lined up.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Bill, for helping me to finally, launch something that I've been thinking about and talking about for years. And I love the fact that, we're doing it this way. There's no pressure. It's really just an opportunity for people to enter into that conversation. I hope that, whoever's watching today and next year, wherever you watch this podcast, that you would feel inspired. And ultimately my goal with this thing is to help you to really have a vantage point to see things from the inside out, and also to really inspire you to live from the inside out, and ultimately to create from the inside out.
Yeah, all those things.
All those things.
And to me, the takeaway word that I'm going home with today is connection. And that I feel like you and I have connected, as we always do whenever we talk. But I hope that we've helped whoever is listening to connect more with the power of who they are.
Yes.
The thing that they have that is a unique gift and light to the world. And it may be, as in my case, it may be what is on the surface appears like a weakness, a deficit, a handicap. There may be that. Mm-hmm. And maybe that will inspire somebody to relook at themselves and say, oh, I thought I had nothing to give. But maybe actually I do have something to give. The very thing that I was ashamed of, that I was hiding, that I was devaluing, may be my greatest contribution to this world in this season, in this time that we're in, where we all need to contribute to turning the ship around and getting the world back into some semblance of normal and prosperity and health in the middle of this pandemic and this crisis. So,
well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. This has been just fun. And thank you, Bill, for helping me do this. You're amazing. Oh, man, we can talk, eh?
That was long, eh? Was that 2 hours?
Very close.
Holy
Hour and 40.
wow.
Hey, if it's good enough.